Dude, that Mario RPG remake looks so good. It looks like such a faithful and passionately made recreation. I really wasn't expecting that from Nintendo. It got me super excited, not only because I want to play it, but also it kinda opens the doors for other remakes of this nature. Which got me thinking, what kind of remakes would I want to see made? Wait, didn't I already do this? I did! So yeah, once upon a time, I made a video highlighting my video game remake wishlist. Basically just talking about games I was hoping would be remade, and why I thought that. Well, that video is 6 years old now. Yikes. And my opinion on this topic has very much changed. I still think remakes are way oversaturated in the game market. It's insane. Nowadays, a Nintendo Direct, or Jeff Keighley Direct, is like 40 to 50% remakes, I swear. They take up a bulk of the gaming market, which kind of makes sense in a way. Games are becoming way bigger and way more expensive and a lot less fun. I mean, a lot less fun in some cases. So a remake is a safe, cost-effective way to fill the gaps between bigger releases. You see this tactic utilized pretty frequently by Nintendo. It's pretty obvious that these ports and remakes are being used as filler while we wait for the big first-party stuff. Most of the time, these are handled by companies outside of the Big N and are announced to release within a few months. I honestly don't really have a problem with this release strategy per se, but I do miss the days where the second-party companies were making smaller-scale original stuff. The DS era had a lot of this. Nintendo still does do this from time to time, which kinda makes a remake feel kinda like a crutch in comparison. And not only Nintendo, but companies like Sony and Capcom have been doing this too. It cuts down on development cost by a pretty wide margin, so I can't really blame them when they sell like hotcakes. I mean, the idea of a remake is kind of a win-win. People who haven't played the game have a brand new shiny game to play, and people who have played the original have a brand new shiny game that they already know they like to play. So it works on paper at least. But remakes can be lesser experiences than the originals or not live up to certain expectations, and the companies seem to be all too trigger happy to make sure that the remaster/remake is the only way to experience that game for players. What I feel makes a good remake is something that can coexist with the original release, and be a kind of meaningful, new, or familiar experience for returning players. But I won't say no to a shiny new coat of paint on a perfectly good game. So that being said, let's go through my wish list I made 6 years ago and see if those choices still are worth a shit. And after that, I'll make a new wish list of games I want to see remade, using my new current epic gamer brain. So like remake my old remake video? You get it? So the first one I pitched in that video was a remake of Partners in Time. And I still kinda stand by this, kinda, sorta. So my main point here was to say that it was kinda weird that they chose Bowser's Inside Story over Partners in Time, which I do kinda stand by. I think Partners in Time would have been a way more intriguing remake. Bowser's Inside Story didn't really feel old or needing of a remake at the time, but I think if you asked most Mario fans, they'd tell you Partners in Time could have used a good remake. There's a lot more issues to fix, and the environments and characters could have been a lot more interesting to see with a new coat of paint, in my opinion. But at the same time, that game has a bit more reliance on utilizing both screens, which might have been slightly more of a pain in the ass than the 3DS. I use the words deserves a remake when talking about it, and I definitely don't agree with that anymore. I think it'd be more enticing to players to see a remake of Partners in Time, but if we're talking based on popularity, then I guess Bowser's Inside Story did deserve it more, quote-unquote. But also in the end, that game sold like 3 copies, so maybe Partners in Time would have been the right decision. Either way, this is a remake I do not think will happen, probably ever. Alpha Dream is gone, and Nintendo is probably just going to leave Mario & Luigi to the wayside. And truthfully, I don't really care if this remake happens or not anymore. I didn't hate the Superstar Saga remake, but it wasn't really an upgrade, really. I don't think I'd recommend it over the original in any circumstance, and I'm sure it would have been the same story for Partners in Time. Okay, the next one was kinda stupid of me. I claimed they should remake Persona 1 and 2 in the engine/style of Persona 5. Okay, this is a good example of how my philosophy has really changed in terms of remakes. I basically used this to talk about how remakes are a good way to bring in a new audience. Persona 1 and 2 are old RPGs with some cryptic old RPG design quirks, so modernizing them could help broaden the amount of people who would be able to comfortably experience them, which I don't agree with anymore. Like, it would be a good way to bring in new players, but those games are those games. Changing their identity completely to be more accessible to Frankly, a completely different type of RPG fan. Seems manic to me now. I could see some HD remasters with quality of life fixes, but what I suggested was pretty narrow-minded. Final Fantasy VII Remake is a good example. Sure, that's a quote-unquote remake. It's such a wildly different experience. Sometimes it feels very intentional that you're not really experiencing a substitute for Final Fantasy VII, just like a different game inspired by FF7. Which is fine in its own right, but not exactly what I'd want from a game that hasn't had a proper port since the PSP. Next one was a remake of Mario Party 2 with online, which kinda happened. I word it like it's such an easy solution, just add online to Mario Party 2 and people would eat it up. I mean, people would. But I was really happy with the route they took. Superstars is basically just a best of 1, 2, and 3 package, keeping the tried and true original Mario Party formula, but in very, very pretty HD. It's much more efficient and much more appealing. It doesn't pigeonhole its nostalgia to just Mario Party 2, and feels like a more substantial game because of it. It was kind of surreal to see these boards reimagined, especially Mario Party 3's. It's a pretty good-ass remake if you can call it that, just slacking on the content a bit. But most importantly, it had online, and it worked pretty dang well. This is a cool circumstance because what we got is sort of better than I even imagined. That being said, I am fine with just this remake existing. This is basically all I would have wanted, so now they can just focus on making a new, good Mario Party. I really quickly joke about how they should make a Monkey Ball 1 and 2 remake, and that actually fucking happened, and it was pretty good, actually, ignoring a few hiccups. And, oh god, the next one. I mentioned that they should remake or port Kid Icarus Uprising. Another example of me being extremely narrow-minded. I love Kid Icarus Uprising. It's probably the best 3DS game. But that's exactly that. It's a 3DS game, through and through. There's a lot of conversation about a Switch port of that game, but nobody seems to remember how that game functioned. It's entirely reliant on the touchscreen. The game revolves around having full touchscreen control for the flying sections and flicking the touchscreen like a trackball for the camera on the ground sections. That translates horribly to a second analog stick. So I have to show this off because this is a great example of why this game will never be ported to anything. I'm trying to get B-roll for this game on an emulator, and I was trying to get it to run as well as I could, and control as well as I could. So I was trying to think of solutions, and there's weird mouse and keyboard scripts you can try, which feel like shit, not gonna lie. The most accurate and most comfortable way I've found to control this game on Citra is having one hand on my Xbox controller and my other hand on my tablet and controlling it like this. So kind of emulating how it would be played on the 3DS. It is not ideal at all and feels weird, and it takes a lot of getting used to, and definitely isn't as cohesive as the 3DS. But it's the best option, and I think this just really proves that, I have all the infinite options in the world with an emulator, and I have to resort to something as barbaric as this setup. So if this isn't proof enough, I don't know what would be. I think maybe they could figure out something that uses the Switch touchscreen, but I'd argue that'd be more uncomfortable, especially on something like a Switch Lite, and it would make a lot of the screen real estate taken up by those bottom screen elements. It just kinda wouldn't work. But I guess I was just not thinking in the video because I word it as if it's such an easy and obvious choice for Nintendo. If they wanted to properly remake that game and for it to control comfortably, it would need to be completely retooled, which is an option, I guess. But I love that game for what it is, and would want people to play it as it was intended to be played. A similar situation happened with The World Ends With You. That game is aggressively a DS game. But boy howdy, did they try their hardest to port it to phones and Switch. They had to basically redo most of the combat system, which is just so lame. It's missing such an immensely important part of TWIWY's identity. Those versions just feel like less of a game because of it, which does not make a good remake or port. There's a lot wrong with those ports of TWIWY, but I won't get into that now. But that being said, I could actually very much see Nintendo still doing this. It'd be exactly what I fear and not change anything, just add some analog stick support and it'd feel like shit and I'd hate it and wonder why anyone would play that version, and I'd sell really well and every Nintendo fan on Twitter would say how much better it is because it isn't cramping their hand, and I'd be like, but it controls worse now, and they'd say this game always controlled weird, and I'd hit my head against a wall until it caved in. So yeah, my opinion on this one has kind of changed a bit, I'd say. Layton Trilogy. I'm actually really surprised this hasn't happened yet. They ported these games to Android and iOS recently, so it'd be pretty easy to port them to Switch. I still think it would be a great home for them, and with the new Layton game coming out, that seems way more likely. I'm curious if they do port it, if they'll bother porting the prequel games too. Some of them are wickedly expensive on 3DS right now. I think you're better off not playing those, but I guess having the option wouldn't hurt. And the last one I mentioned in that video is a remake of Princess Crown, which is this really niche Japanese-only Vanillaware game originally made for Saturn. Now, weirdly enough, this actually also sorta happened. My main point with this pick was that the game is really cool and pretty important to that studio's history, but it's only available on the Saturn and PSP, and only in Japan. So it was sorta impossible to play for a Westerner. And luckily, the game was bundled with sci-fi masterpiece 13 Sentinels. But only in Japan. What a shame. That could have been a really good opportunity to localize it, but maybe it just wasn't plausibly worth the money for them? Understandable, probably. I would still love to see this happen, but I think Vanillaware games need to be a tad more profitable in the West. They gotta port their entire catalog to Switch. I'm kinda surprised that hasn't happened yet. The best version of Muramasa is stuck on Vita. I feel Switch or PC ports would be such a financially safe idea. I blame Atlus and their impeccable skill at choosing not to port their games to convenient hardware. So yeah, that's me going through my old video. My opinions have definitely changed a bit. So I guess we'll work on my new wish list. I honestly don't know why I always say we as if you watching are part of the process. I will be making the new wish list. The term remake is pretty broad these days, but I'll be picturing something akin to the Mario RPG remake, or I guess like the Zelda remakes on 3DS, so not exactly a port, but an enhanced recreation of the original game. And not as far as something like FF7 Remake, just so you know what kind of remake I'm thinking in my head when I talk about these, if that makes sense at all. Okay, so the first one, Zelda 2. I think this game is super underrated in my opinion. It's really actiony and responsive for the era. I kind of prefer it to Zelda 1 in some ways, which is definitely not the common sentiment. This game has been lambasted online, being the butt of a lot of jokes, mainly because of its big shift in genres and it being really hard. Ain't no way I was ever beating this game without save states. That being said, it feels so ripe for remake potential. The formula is there for a solid 2D action game, but it's like a million years old now, so it's definitely a little limited. You could expand Link's moveset, give more options for magic, make one or two more dungeons, revamp some of the bosses, the list goes on. My brain is like constantly doing Jimmy Neutron brain blast thinking about how to flesh out or reimagine this game, I swear. And oh man, they could have this like really slick hand-drawn visuals inspired by its manga-esque art style. Fuck, I'd be drooling over that. The game is such a unique take on the Zelda formula, and I feel a lot of people haven't given this one a chance. And truthfully, I could kinda see Nintendo plausibly doing this. Maybe the hand-drawn graphics are pushing it a bit, but I can dream. Rayman 1 has aged like milk. Well, kinda. Parts have aged like fine wine, and parts have not. It controls a little weird, and the difficulty is all over the place. But holy moly, if it isn't some eye candy. This one's tough, because I do like the pixel art, it's timeless, but if you really nailed the painting style and replicated what the pixel artist was going for, I feel this could be an excellent looking remake. Give it one of those Dragon Trap-esque toggles and it'll make everybody happy. Honestly, thinking of a Rayman remake on the same level as the Dragon's Trap remake, just, oh my god, that'd be so good. I love this game to death. It's a huge part of my childhood, but it could really use a lot of quality of life fixes. Dropping the continues, making the stipulations to finish the game way more generous, and maybe just completely remove that Eat at Joe's stage, please. Despite its issues, Rayman really does evoke such a whimsical mood. I would love to see this. Day one this comes out, I'd be ripping out my wallet, putting it down and opening up a torrent site because ain't no way I'm supporting Ubisoft. But they should still fund it anyway, I'm just saying. So one of my all-time favorite remakes, which I don't think I had even played yet when I made that original video, is Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia. I could gush your ear off about this game, my favorite Fire Emblem game and one of my favorite examples on how to handle a remake in general. It's just filled to the brim with passion and charm. Well, I always thought it was really neat because that game was called Echoes: Shadows of Valentia, kind of implying that the Echoes title is going to be reserved for their remakes. Well, it's been 7 years and we haven't gotten a new Echoes Fire Emblem game. So I think next they should remake Thrasia 776. I feel next to Gaiden, which is Shadows of Valentia's original game, it's like the most underappreciated Fire Emblem game by a wide margin. It came out in a really limited format in Japan, and they very rarely reference it in more recent Fire Emblem games. But I've dabbled in it, and it's seriously one of the most intriguing Fire Emblems. A lot of really interesting mechanics that help flesh out the tone and character motivations. I've heard the story and theming is a lot more grounded and human than other larger scale Fire Emblem games, and man, it's hard. The way the difficulty reflects the struggles of the world and characters is so cool, way ahead of its time. It's got a lot going for it, and while I want to get back into it, if they announce a remake, I'd probably hold out for it. Shadows of Valentia made me such a huge shill for Intelligent Systems retreading old ground. I'm not even really picky about this one. As long as they keep the map design / mechanics similar enough to retain the difficulty and brain-massaging strategy, I'm good. Add whatever waifu, husbando, dating, matchmaking thing you want, Intelligent Systems. Actually don't do that. I don't know why I just said that. I take that back. We can all agree that Sony is creatively bankrupt, right? They shut down all creative studios, and companies like Insomniac are getting more and more sterile as time goes on. The days of unique ideas and experimental games are way behind us, so we will definitely never get an Ape Escape remaster. But I don't care, I want it anyway. The Ape Escape trilogy is fantastic, and very much stuck on their old hardware. I would love to see a pseudo collection / remaster of these games made. I don't think they would need to do anything super fancy, just like AI upscaled textures and add a fancy widescreen mode and 60 FPS and stuff. Even the PS1 game, I could see them retaining its graphics and style while adding things like widescreen, etc. That'd be pretty cool. They kinda almost did that with the PSP port of that game, but that version's pretty bad, so... I think at some point they ported Ape Escape 2 to PSN, but we never got Ape Escape 3, which is objectively the best one. Such a shame. Every time I watch one of those PlayStation State of Play things, there's this small, hopeful part of my brain that just keeps my fingers crossed for Ape Escape, but seriously, Sony is not what they used to be, so I don't see this realistically happening anytime soon. Once everyone stops buying their milked Last of Us remasters, then maybe we'll see some creativity from them, but that will probably never happen. Okay, so the last one on this current wish list, we need more Rocket Knight Adventures. This game is one of my all-time favorites and definitely takes the spot for best Genesis game for me. And its sequels are pretty dang good too. Sparkster on Super Nintendo is so good, but we have genuinely not seen a single port of these games on any platform ever? Hold on. Yeah, I double-checked. Yep, they have literally never been re-released. So cool, Konami. And obviously just seeing a collection or emulated version of these games on modern hardware would be neat, but my dreams are much bigger and probably more unrealistic. I'd love to see a pixel remaster of that original game. Something akin to the Pocky and Rocky remake thing by Natsume. There are so many ridiculously talented pixel artists in the industry making drop-dead gorgeous games. I could only imagine a spruced up version of Rocket Knight, like, God. The game still holds up pretty damn well. All you need to do is make continues optional, and that's kind of it. But by all means, if they want to add a new level or boss, I'm a-okay with that. Obviously, just replicate the game's physics and mechanics as close as possible. Also, like, do some really cool remix soundtrack with modern tech, but using FM synth instruments from the original game's OST, and oh my god, it would be so good. I'm gonna faint thinking about this remake. Sparkster deserves another chance. Another chance. We don't talk about his second chance he got.
What the fuck? Oh god, that's too good.
Remakes are an interesting beast in the video game medium. There is so much inherent potential to remaking a game, using someone else's groundwork and being able to focus on polishing it. Nothing feels quite as good as playing a reimagined version of one of your favorite games and it blowing your mind all over again. And it's a shame it's become such a crutch for devs. While writing this, there was an article I saw that Sony is remastering The Last of Us 2. Like, you can't convince me that isn't the cheapest abuse of the remake/remaster trend ever. Either way, it's fun to dream about these theoretical good remakes. I love brainstorming creative projects like these, so you should tell me your wish list. I'm actually really curious on what kind of remakes others may want to see and why. Bonus points if you can give me a breakdown on what you'd want it to look like or what you'd want them to change or keep, etc. Definitely not an elaborate way to keep the engagement up on my video. Definitely not. Until next time, friends.